good evening. Welcome to the
Good
Essex
evening. Thank you for
County
hosting this.
Ornithological Club monthly meeting and speaker series. I'm Constance Lapeat, president of the ECOC. Thank you so much for joining tonight. Looking outside, it's gotten dark. It's a little bit past the woodcock nuptial flight time, but it's too windy tonight for that. So you made the right choice to be here tonight. And if you've come to hear Jack E. Davis, professor of environmental history and Pulitzer Prize winning author, talk about the improbable journey of the bald eagle, you are in the right place. That talk will begin at about 7:45 after this brief ECOC meeting. Happy April, ECOC members. This is the last speaker series of this season. We hope you enjoyed talks this year. If you missed some that you wanted to see, please know that you can find them on the ECOC website. There is one, if you missed, by Dr. Drew Lanham. He spoke on March 4th about birding wild black. That is up on the website, but it's going to expire soon. So if you want to see that one, you have until April 8th. We are going to be back in the fall with more speakers, but we are going to brave it and go live. So we will be back in Salem. For those of you out of practice, please practice your parallel parking and your driving in crowded spaces, and we hope to see you then. But fear not, we do have some events for the High Holy month of April, the High Holy month for birders, that is. So we're not going away completely. We will have, I hope you will join us on Sunday, May 15th. I will be co-leading a trip with former ECOC President Jim McCoy on Plum Island. It's actually a birds and brews walk. So we're going to work up a thirst on Plum Island looking for warblers, and then we'll head over to a local microbrewery and quench that thirst. We'll sit outside. You can bring your lunches. Very comfortable if we happen to be in a little COVID spike. Hopefully not. But I hope you'll join us because Jim and I are doing a lot of hard research on what is the best microbrewery to take you all to. Again, that's May 15th. We'll meet on Plum Island at Lot 1 at 7 o'clock. And if you forget any of this, we'll have the details up on the ECOC website soon. Hope you'll join us. Second event is the Grand Mama of them all. It's going to be May 20, let's see, it's the Saturday, May 21st. It's the 116th paddle of the Ipswich River and bird survey. Arguably the longest continuously running event of its kind. It's also a lot of fun and really beautiful. I hope you'll join us. Dave Brewster, the ECOC secretary, will be organizing. You can find his contact information at the ECOC website. Bring your boat, bring your bins. There'll be great birds and there will be great camaraderie. You're all welcome. I hope to see you there. And finally, I saw Robert Buxbaum out there. I wonder, Robert, did you want to do a plug for the Mass Audubon fundraiser, Birdathon? Robert, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Yeah, see,
Okay.
I'm retired now, so I don't have to do any of that, but I will say something. Yeah, it's the that would be on the week, the day before your booze and birds trip. So
Birds and brews.
birds and booze. So we got to get our priorities straight. So this is Mass Audubon's annual fundraiser, and it's Birdathon, and it's just a lot of fun. You can pick the team that you want to be part of, and check the Mass Audubon website for more details. But it's a 24-hour ritual of seeing all the birds you can, but mostly hopefully you have fun and also raise funds for Mass Audubon's bird programs, among other things. So it's a very important fundraising event for Mass Audubon every year. So and it's a fun event. So that's the date and the time. So hopefully everyone can participate.
Thank you, Robert. And don't let that 24-hour thing scare you. I don't. stay up all night. As a matter of fact, you can sit out and watch the birds at your feeder, or if you're tied up that weekend, just donate. It's a great cause. So please consider that. Again, it's May 13th through 14th. That's a Friday.
Friday and
evening
Saturday.
into
That's-
Saturday.
Yeah.
And does anyone else out there have any announcements? Don't be shy. Take yourself off mute and pipe right up.
I have one. This is Diane.
Go ahead, Diane.
There's a couple of American bald eagles on Flax Pond in Lynn. I don't see that they've made a nest or attempting to make a nest, but they are visible every day.
That's excellent and very appropriate for tonight's talk, Diane.
Yep.
We are going to open the floor up for sightings in just a little bit. But if people don't have announcements, I'm going to go hand this over to our treasurer for our treasurer's report. Mary, are you there?
I'm here, yep.
Great.
Everyone see and hear me okay? All right, I'm
Yeah.
sitting here in my my web finery to tell you that we are looking for membership dues as always. I don't have my props with me tonight. It's pizza night, so I have that. I don't want to show you because gross. But anyway, if you have not renewed for this year, please do. I will give you my address in chat so you know where to send the funds. We have a pretty good turnover so far. For 2 years of pandemic, the numbers are awesome, but more is always appreciated. So it's $15 a year per household, $12 per individual, or you can become a lifetime member for $200, which is a pretty excellent deal. I could do the April Fool's thing and tell you that you will get a handsome leather-bound book, but you won't. You get membership in the club for a year, and it's an awesome club. I am also looking forward to that research that's going on with the birds and brews. So that kind of thing is just one of the many perks that you get as a member of the ECOC. So we're doing well. We could always do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And of course, if you enjoyed tonight's speaker and you're not yet a member, please consider joining. Those membership dues allow us to bring great speakers like Jack to you. Thank you, Mary. I'd like to ask Dawn Paul to present her book of the month. Dawn, are you there?
I am here. I actually don't have a book of the month. What I have here this month is a kind of a plastic guide, a pocket guide, very easy to carry. And this is for Cape Ann. So it's the Gloucester, Essex, Ipswich, Manchester area. But a lot of what is in here is actually probably North Shore in general. So it's an upland guide. It's not a coastal guide. And it's, oops, yeah. What does it have? It has everything in here. This little guide sort of folds out and has butterflies, dragonflies, bugs, reptiles, amphibians. It has freshwater fish, only 4 of them, mammals. But what it has a lot of, which is why I thought I would share this tonight, is birds. A lot of birds. And if you either don't like to carry bulky things, or if you know someone who's fairly new to birding or natural history study in general, something like this is good because all it has is the really common things. So people don't feel like they have to know everything or they have to really, you know, leaf through this thick book. They can probably figure out what they're looking at very quickly, and then they'll move along to the big thick books. So this is the Cape Ann Trail Steward's Guide. It's an organization. I've put their website in the chat. I picked this up at Cape Ann Museum, which is a lovely place. If you go into their shop, they still have some of these, I hope. And so enjoy.
Dawn, thank you so much. It's always great to have a tool to narrow down the choices early to the most bright. It's a horse when you see hoof prints, not a zebra. That's so valuable. Thank you for sharing that. So now I'd like to hear from you all as to what you're seeing out there for birds. I can tell you that the birds in my yard are not terribly exciting, and yet what they're doing is fascinating. I'm watching these crows just going back and forth with sticks in their mouths, trying to figure out who's doing what and where are they going. It's wonderful. The noise in the morning is up. The dawn chorus has arrived. So what are you all seeing?
Constance, I did my weekly train ride today into Boston and saw 2 egrets
Oh, that's great.
in the marshes that in the Saugus area.
What a treat that train ride is, right? It's always surprising. And it's nice they're so white. They stand out. You can see them from far away.
I had someone servicing my tractor and other equipment here a few days ago, and there were scores of tree swallows that had returned, and they were sort of flying half over the wetlands just to my north and half over the farm. But I've never seen so many actually. So it just was really lovely.
That's a credit to your property there, Sissy.
And just for all of you who know me, I just brought home a new lucky dog.
Yay.
Yay. Congrats.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Caroline. I have seen a pair of bald eagles who are incubating eggs
Wow.
in Gloucester.
Is that on 10 pound?
No,
Oh,
it's in West Gloucester.
oh, wow.
Yes, I think it's a new nest. The state ornithologist got in touch with me and asked me to keep him posted because he wasn't aware of this nest.
That's great. Good fun.
Yeah. I'm excited.
Excellent.
I could report a couple of things. We did a pelagic trip on Jay Frontiero's boat, the Seven Seas, and that was part of this Cape Ann birding weekend. That was a couple of weekends ago. And the actual trip itself, we were hoping to see lots of alcids, which we've seen in the past, and it really didn't see hardly anything. We did some chumming and brought in some gulls and gannets, and then one kittiwake came by, but no alcids, no dovekies or anything. And Jay really tried hard. First we went to Stellwagen Bank, then we went to Jeffrey's Leads. So we burned a lot of fossil fuels trying to find something. And then we finally, as we're heading back inside the breakwater, somebody yells out, "Puffin!" And in fact, we had a puffin inside Gloucester Harbor. So that saved the day. It was wonderful to see. And we were able to get pretty close looks at it. So I don't know whether something was wrong with it or something. It's not what you'd expect it to see. And if you eBird puffin in Gloucester Harbor, you'll get flagged. You need an explanation for that. So nothing that one would have expected.
I'm glad the trip was rescued. That's a nice sighting.
Yeah. The other thing I saw, and this was a puzzle to me, but I saw this was washed up dead on West Beach, was a common murre. And you know how birds theoretically have 4 toes? Like when you have a webbed foot, usually the last toe is the one that points backwards, isn't webbed. Well, from what I could tell from the murre, and I'm picking up this dead, smelly bird, it didn't have that 4th toe. So I went looking around and seeing if there's anything, maybe alcids don't have that 4th toe that paces backward, or it's very tiny. So if anybody knows, let me know. I was curious.
Well, I don't, but that's an excellent observation.
Good evening. My
Hello.
name is Linda. I've never been to your meetings before, and
Welcome.
I live in Metro West. And I have a bird feeder, and I have 2 birds that normally don't frequent my bird feeder. I have a pair of woodpeckers, and I also have a mockingbird that's been hanging around. And not coming to the feeder, but I've never had a mockingbird this close to the house before. So I think there's something wrong with it because there may be a nest in my juniper, which is right next to the bird feeder.
Well, keep an eye on that and let us know what happens. That sounds like some good birds in your yard.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Hi, this is Xiaolai. And we saw a pair of peregrine falcon in Woburn on a high cliff. And I went there twice. The first time, one of the bird really blended into the cliff, and we really had a hard time finding it to spot it. And the second time, we were so lucky. One of the bird was resting on a pole, electric pole. So we were able to take some good pictures of it. So we really want to see that bird for a long time. So when we saw it, we were so happy.
That's great. That's a reminder that, April, of course, is tax month, which is not a happy thought, but you do have the opportunity to make a donation on your taxes to the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program, which is part of the Massachusetts state organization that tracks rare, endangered species and sensitive habitats. So the peregrine falcon is an incredible success story now. I think up to something like 800 pairs in Massachusetts after being absent. That we could thank that group for a lot of the conservation work that they've done. So if you have an opportunity, if you haven't sent in your taxes, or if you have, you can still make a donation. Just look for that organization online.
Awesome, thanks.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Any last sighting out there somebody wants to share before we move on? Okay, good. Well, thank you for sharing all of those, and it's only going to get better as the season warms up. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Janie Winchell, and she'll introduce tonight's speaker. Janie Winchell is not only the ECOC Vice President and Program Director, she's also the Director of the Art and Nature Center at the Peabody Essex Museum. Janie?
Thank you, Constance, and it's wonderful to be here with all of you and seeing all the sightings. Thanks for joining us. So as Constance said, my name is Janie Winchell, and I am delighted to be the link that joins the Peabody Essex and the Essex County Ornithological Club. And I'm so pleased to introduce Jack Davis, our speaker for tonight's program, The Bald Eagle, America's Bird. Professor Jack Davis grew up in Florida, but spends his summers in southern New Hampshire, where he has deep family ties. He earned his doctorate nearby at Brandeis University, but returned back to Florida to be the professor of history and Rothman Family Chair in Humanities at the University of Florida, specializing in environmental history and sustainability studies. In April 2019, Dr. Davis was one of the recipients of the prestigious 2019 Andrew Carnegie Fellowship Award in recognition of his scholarship and writing. Some of you may already know of Davis as the Pulitzer Prize winning author of The Gulf, The Making of an American Sea. His other books include, among others, An Everglades, Providence, Marjory, Stoneman, Douglas, and the American Environmental Century, and of course, his new release, which is the topic of tonight's talk, The Bald Eagle, The Improbable Journey of America's Bird, released earlier this month and already receiving critical acclaim. So we are very honored to have you with us here tonight, Jack, and we are all warmly greeting you, even though you are in the warmer place than we are right now. Thanks so much for being here with us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Janie. And it truly is a pleasure to be here. And even if the temperature is 76 degrees here, I'm sorry, I had to work that in. But I should say, by the way, Marjory Stoneman Douglas grew up in Taunton, Mass, so not far from you guys. And she graduated from Wellesley in 1921. So even though she spent the majority of her life in Florida, she always had a warm place in her heart for New England and Massachusetts especially. So I'm going to share my screen here if I don't screw things up. And let's see how this does. Okay, are you seeing my full screen, Janie?
Yes.
Okay, so we're good. Okay, great. So I love to talk about bald eagles. I devote a good part of a chapter in the book to the restoration program in Massachusetts out at Quabbin Reservoir. Highly successful program, as were the other restoration programs around the country, which I'll mention a little bit later. But I want to start by telling you why I decided to write this book on the bald eagle. There are actually a couple of reasons. One is that we're seeing many more bald eagles. It's just evidence of hearing testimonies tonight. Many bald eagles today than we saw 10, 15 years ago. And we're very excited about it. It's when we see a bald eagle cross in the sky, it's one of those, punch the guy in the ribs next to you moments. And we get very excited. We're glad to have that bird in our lives again. It's something of a novelty for many of us. I grew up on Tampa Bay in Florida, and in the 70s, I never saw a bald eagle. And that was because the bay was on the verge, in part because the bay was on the verge of ecological death. And that's all changed now. We see, I see a lot of bald eagles down there, as you were seeing more and more up in Massachusetts. So I thought that since they become so present in our life that that people would like to know, perhaps like to know a little bit about this bird and its history with the American people. And that's what this book is about. It's a cultural and natural history of the bald eagle. I also wrote it because it's this great American conservation success story, the comeback of the bald eagle. And typically environmental writers focus on the grim and the tragic, the doom and the gloom. And I felt that readers really needed a break from that. And and not that there isn't the grim and the tragic in the bald eagle story, but there's also redemption and there's also resurrection with regard to the population. But also I wrote it because I write my books for a general audience. I don't write my books for academics, which is not to criticize my academics who do. They put out some cutting edge scholarship, that's for sure. But I want my history to reach a broader audience. And the bald eagle seemed like that this would be an environmental story that would have an appeal across the political spectrum. I mean, who doesn't love the bald eagle? Whether you're a red, white, and blue American, or a tree hugger, or a birder, or all of those things in one. We just love the bald eagle. And the bald eagle, again, even though we're seeing it more and more today, it's actually been around for about 1 million years, the best that we can tell. Eagles live across the world. There's some 60 odd species, and many of them date back to 10 million or so years ago. But the bald eagle, is the best we can tell, is about 1 million years old. But for the purpose of our story tonight, or discussion tonight, I want to start in 1782 and with the Great Seal of the United States. Did that work, Janie? Are you on the proper slide now? The Great Seal.
Going. Yeah, you're golden.
Okay, good. All right, I won't interrupt anymore. Okay, so 1782, the bald eagle was put on the Great Seal of the United States when Congress adopted the Great Seal of the United States. It had been long in coming, the Great Seal itself, not necessarily the bald eagle, but the Great Seal itself. On July 4th, 1776, within a few hours of Congress approving the Declaration of Independence, it formed a committee to devise a seal for the nation, the new nation. And that committee had a stellar cast. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Ben Franklin, who, I mean, could you ask for a better, you know, triumvirate of minds and men that, you know, forward-looking men than those three? Well, as it happens, they failed miserably with their proposal for the Great Seal. Many people think that Ben Franklin wanted the turkey for the Great Seal and for the national bird. That's actually a myth. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But Franklin wanted something altogether different from a turkey or the bald eagle or bird, period. And I'm not going to tell you what he wanted, because I want you to read the book. But also, it'll blow your mind, because it did mine when I learned what Franklin wanted. It just didn't seem to fit with the guy. So that committee failed. Two other committees were subsequently formed. They failed. Consultants, other experts failed. It took Congress 6 years before it found a design for a seal that it approved. And the person who proposed putting the bald eagle on the Great Seal was Charles Thomson, and he didn't make that proposal until 1782. And I think it was a brilliant choice for a number of reasons. Now, bald eagles, or excuse me, eagles have been part of heraldry dating back to the ancients, to the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. Bald eagles, or eagles, excuse me, have been on seals of nation states and coats of arms. But if you look at those other eagles, they are non-ornithological. They don't represent any specific species. The bald eagle is the first identifiable eagle to appear on the seal of a nation state. And it's a great pick. It was a great pick on the part of Charles Thomson. He insisted that the eagle on the seal be an, quote, American bald eagle, end quote. And it's brilliant because the bald eagle lives in the wild nowhere else outside of North America. So it's truly an all-American bird. The United States at the time wanted to assert its own identity separate of European influences. So the bald eagle fits well with that idea. And it's also this very charismatic bird. It's highly easily identifiable, at least the adults are. It's a charismatic bird. It conveys strength, at least from our minds, in our minds, strength, courage, and freedom. Ideals that this young republic, this new republic, associated with itself. And it also, if you look closely at the bald eagle, and I'm sure you've noticed this before, if you notice the suborbital ridge or bony ridge above the eyes. Now, for the bald eagle, that serves as a sun visor. But to us, that represents the perfect, the ideal "don't tread on me" stare. Again, fitting wonderfully what the nation wanted to convey. Now, before the bald eagle appeared on the Great Seal of the United States, you didn't see its image very often in decorative arts or anywhere else around the colonies in the States. You saw generic eagles, but not bald eagles. But the bald eagle on the seal became an instant hit, and Americans started putting its image on everything. Obviously, government insignia, but in decorative arts, on business logos, on organizational logos, sports team uniforms. It has always been a hugely popular image in American history. Here is a marching band from the late 19th century in the bottom right, with an eagle on their jerseys. I would love to have one of those jerseys, actually. And the New York Eagles, a famous Negro League baseball team. And of course, today we see the bald eagle everywhere. Of course, it's on Yingling beer label, the oldest beer in the country. It's on the back of motorcycle jackets. I don't know if anybody who's zoomed in had at one time been so unfortunate to own an AMC Eagle. but there is a car that didn't live up to its name. And if you owned one, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Goodyear Eagle tires. It's everywhere. It's the most popular sports team and animal mascot in the country. Now, while Americans embrace the image and put it on virtually everything, they had a whole different opinion of the species itself, the species they didn't like. The bald eagle is a top predator, and Americans throughout the late 18th and throughout the 19th and on into the early 20th century treated the bald eagle like any other predator, like a wolf or a coyote, a bear, a mountain lion. A bald eagle seen was a bald eagle to be shot. It was accused of all sorts of crimes, wrongfully accused of all sorts of crimes. Now, forget about a dark alley. I don't think I'd want to run into these guys on the, on the street in the middle of the day. But Americans were engaged in this kind of activity endlessly. We hear about the bison slaughter, but we don't hear about the bald eagle slaughter. When I was doing my research, I did a search on newspapers.com, which is a database of thousands of local daily and weekly newspapers across the country. I did a search with a date range 1850 to 1920, searching 3 words in quotation marks, bald eagle shot, and I got over 140,000 hits. So just give you an idea what we were doing to the bald eagle in the 19th century. Now, I said earlier it had been wrongfully accused of all sorts of crimes, mainly that it was a livestock thief, that it would carry away calves and pigs and sheep and chickens. Now, of those, the only thing a bald eagle can lift off the ground is a chicken. A large bald eagle with momentum behind it can carry away perhaps 5 pounds, but it certainly can't carry away a sheep. But even ornithologists were making these claims about the bald eagle. Even ornithologists throughout into the early 20th century accepted the killing, the control of these predators. And mothers, in fact, were warned, don't leave your children, your infants unattended outside unless you want a bald eagle to carry it away to its nest. Now, what we're seeing here, before I tell you about this image, McGuffey's Reader, some of you are probably familiar with. Next to the Bible, it was the most read book in the 19th century. It's a primer for immigrants who wanted to learn English and for school children. And there was a story in McGuffey's Reader for decades of a bald eagle carrying away a girl to its nest. And the image that accompanied that story was of a girl who had to have been at least 6 or 7 years old. This is a 1908, as the caption reads, a 1908 silent film rescued from an eagle's nest, put out by Edison Studios. And in this film, which is the story revolves around a lumberjack and his family, his wife and his daughter. In the opening scene, they step outside their cabin in the woods. The father kisses his daughter and his wife goodbye, skips off into the woods with his axe for a day of work. The mother returns inside the cabin, leaving her child outside on the ground to play alone. And in the next scene, and this is a silent film, right? And the next scene, you can watch this on YouTube, by the way. You can watch the entire film. In the next scene, after the mother goes inside, you see this eagle that looks more like an ogre than it does an eagle fly across the sky behind the cabin. Now, and you can just hear, watching this film on YouTube, you can hear that organ in the orchestra pit rising to a crescendo as this is happening. And then in the next scene, the eagle flies in, swoops down and grabs the baby. The eagle's on wires, by the way. It's a prop eagle, and its wings are flapping about this speed on wires and very visible. It picks up the child, which has its own wires, and flies away with it, or the child's being carried away on these wires, crying its head off. It's not acting, it's literally crying. And this is in the days before child actors had any sort of protection. The mother discovers what happens. She runs out, finds her husband, who climbs down the side of a cliff to a ledge where the eagle's nest is, and saves his daughter, gets into a fight with the eagle. And another special effects of 1908, a club magically appears in his hand from one frame to the other, and he clobbers the eagle and kicks it over the ledge and then celebrates. And the father was played by none other than D.W. Griffith. And if you're aware, D.W. Griffith was the director who made the film The Birth of a Nation in 1915 that led to the resurrection of the Ku Klux Klan. Interestingly, after Rescued from an Eagle's Nest appeared, critics panned him as an actor and said he had no talent. And he left acting and went into directing. And you have to wonder if they had liked him, whether or not he would have not directed The Birth of a Nation. But in any case, by the late 19th century, bald eagles were missing in action from most of the eastern seaboard states. Now, let me put that in perspective. In 1782, when the Continental Congress approved the Great Seal with the bald eagle on its front, bald eagles were nesting along the Delaware River every mile or two. They were seen every day. They were everywhere. But by the late 19th century, they were a rare sight. In New England states outside of Maine, in New York, in Pennsylvania, in Midwestern states, they were so absent that from the East and the Midwest, that people thought they were Rocky Mountain birds. And by the early 20th century, many Americans began to worry that the bald eagle population in the lower 48 might go the way of the passenger pigeon, the last of which died, of course, in 1914 in the Cincinnati Zoo, or the Carolina parakeet, the last of which died in 1918, also in the Cincinnati Zoo. The message there is, don't go live in the Cincinnati Zoo. And so Americans were worried about this. But the old myth still existed. It's about bald eagles being kidnappers, stealing all sorts of livestock. In 1917, when America went to war in Europe, taking the image of the bald eagle with it, the territory of Alaska adopted a bald eagle bounty to protect, claiming to protect the salmon industry, maintaining the bald eagle was a thief, that it was unnecessary competition for the salmon fishers. And so for 50 cents, someone in Alaska could turn in if somebody in Alaska turned in a set of talons to the territorial government, they could earn 50 cents. And many people, in fact, became full-time bald eagle bounty hunters. And the bounty remained in effect until 1952. And during that period, the territory of Alaska paid bounties on over 128,000 bald eagles. So things were dire in the early 20th century. But many people stepped forward and said, we've got to change our ways with the bald eagle. We need protection for it. And began encouraging National Audubon, the National Audubon, then known as the National Association of Audubon Societies, to lobby for protective legislation, federal legislation for the bald eagle, and to lobby against the Alaska bounty. Well, the leadership at National Audubon at the time wouldn't do it. And so this woman, Rosalie Edge from New York, who was a member of Audubon, started her own organization, which she called the Emergency Conservation Committee, a wonderful name, Emergency Conservation Committee, in part to expose the duplicity within the most influential and the best funded conservation organization in the country, and that was the Audubon Society. And eventually she succeeded. And she eventually succeeded in getting the leadership in Audubon removed. But she also, along with others, succeeded in convincing Congress to pass protective legislation, which it did in 1940, 1 year before America went to war against fascist tyranny. And Congress understood, and this is written in the legislation of the 1940 Bald Eagle Protection Act. Congress understood that if it lost a living species behind this powerful symbol of freedom, that it would undermine the integrity of that symbol. Here was the bird of freedom being denied its own freedom. And so when that act was passed, the bald eagle became the first individual species to have federal protection. All protective legislation before then covered multiple species, but the bald eagle got its own law. Yet, 5 years later, what happens? Well, this is what happens. In August 1945, DDT was released to the general market, and Americans immediately began saturating the lower 48 states, not just for agriculture or forestry, but also in their homes. DDT was sprayed everywhere, and it had a devastating impact on all sorts of wildlife. Fish suffered from DDT. Fish populations declined. Fish became saturated with DDT, passing it on up the food chain. Birds, of course, were adversely affected by DDT, including fishing raptors, such as the bald eagle and the osprey. Those birds disappeared from many coastal areas. In the northern Gulf of Mexico, by the 1960s, you couldn't find the pelican, which was the state bird of Louisiana. You couldn't find the pelican in Louisiana. You couldn't find it across the northern Gulf. You couldn't find ospreys. When I grew up in Tampa Bay, again in the 1970s, we didn't see any ospreys. And of course, the bald eagle went the same way as these birds and so many other thousands of avian species. Their population plummeted through the 1950s. A census of nests was conducted in 1963 of the lower 48 states, and fewer than 500 were counted. And the bald eagles, there were no bald eagles nesting in New England states outside of Maine. There were no bald eagles nesting in Ohio, which had been a major bald eagle state at one time, or Pennsylvania, or New York. There were no bald eagles nesting across the southern states outside of Florida, with the exception 1 or 2 a year in the Carolinas, but not consistently. So the bald eagle was in trouble, and so were the American people. We barely 1/3 of the nation waters by 1970. Both freshwater and coastal waters were safe for swimming and fishing. They weren't safe for us. They weren't safe for bald eagles. And of course, that was those kind of conditions plus air pollution led to the first Earth Day of 1970. There's a major shift in environmental sensibilities in America. 2 years later, 1972, 1972 becomes a watershed year for the bald eagle. Congress increased the penalty under the Bald Eagle Protection Act for harming a bald eagle. You could be sent to federal prison. You could be heavily fined for doing so. That year, Congress also added raptors to the Migratory Bald Treaty, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which of course was passed in 1918. But raptors had not been covered under it. In 1972, the EPA banned the sale of DDT in the United States. Also in 1972, Congress, with decisive bipartisan support, passed the Clean Water Act, which was vitally important to the comeback of the bald eagle. You can have all the protection in the world for the bald eagle. You can outlaw, you can send people to jail for harming it, You can, of course, protect it under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, protected under the Endangered Species Act, which was passed in 1973, but without cleaning up its habitat, its watery habitat. The bald eagle could not have staged a comeback. Now, as I mentioned earlier, bald eagles are fishing raptors. They will eat birds, they will eat land mammals or animals, excuse me, but they prefer fish, and they typically build their nest within 100 or 200 yards of water. So with all of these provisions in place, these protections, the Clean Water Act, starting to clean up the nation's water. Water is 50 years old this year, by the way. In October, the Clean Water Act will be 50 years old. Something worth celebrating. With all these provisions in place, in 1976, in the bicentennial year of the nation, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife launched eagle restoration programs across the country. The first was in New York, and then the next was in Georgia. Restoration came to Massachusetts and Quabbin Reservoir in 1982 on the 200th anniversary of the adoption of the Great Seal of the United States. Two birds. I write about all this in the book. It's a fascinating story, and I interviewed a number of the people involved in this restoration program. Two eaglets were flown into Logan in June 1982. They came from nests in northern Michigan, and they were named just the ideal name, and so Massachusetts, so Boston, they were named Betsy and Ross. And so they were the first eagles to be a part of the Massachusetts Eagle Restoration Program, which ran for 7 years. And in this program, eagles were removed from nests from healthy areas, northern Michigan, as I said, Canada, Alaska, and Minnesota, and brought to hacking sites in states where there were no nesting bald eagles. These hacking sites consisted of these, what I call lion cages, on top of stilts or posts outdoors, exposing the eaglets to the elements as they would be in a nest, raised in makeshift nests within these cages, or these hack boxes as they were known, fed from behind blinds so they wouldn't imprint on people, but they imprinted on their territory. And in their minds, that territory became their natal territory. And bald eagles return to the region where they return to the region of their natal territory when they're reach breeding age, to find a mate, to build a nest, and to raise a brood. And so Quabbin the program was so successful there that those eagles who graduated from the Quabbin Restoration Program ended up repopulating the other New England states. So when you see a bald eagle in New Hampshire, in Connecticut, in Rhode Island, in Vermont, there's a good chance that bald eagle, and of course Massachusetts, that eagle is a descendant of the original Quabbin birds. In fact, where I live in the summertime in New Hampshire, on the lake next to my lake, there is the oldest bald eagle in the state, nesting bald eagle in the state lives, and that bald eagle is the descendant of the Quabbin birds. But also restoration required the efforts of not just Fish and Wildlife and state wildlife officials, but also a number of volunteers, such as this woman here, Doris Mager, who in 1979 spent 6 days in an abandoned eagle's nest to raise awareness about the plight of bald eagles and to raise money for the first aviary rehab center at Florida Audubon outside of Orlando. She got national attention for what she was doing, featured in Life magazine, Look magazine, even Paul Harvey talked to her. She was the rest of the story. In this picture, she's 60 years old, 1986. She is finishing up a bike ride across the country from California to Florida, accompanied by a support van that would carry, I can't remember whether this is General Patton or George Washington, by a bald eagle and a barred owl named E.T. for extra terrific. And she, on her bike, she would stop at Kmart stores. Kmart sponsored her. Kmart stores and give lectures in parking lots to talk about the importance of raptors in the ecosystem. And there were many others like her that traveled around the country to give lectures on raptors, opening up raptor centers in the 1970s, rehab centers and aviaries in the 70s and the 80s. Today, there virtually every state in the country has at least one raptor center. A good many of them have multiple raptor and rehab centers. But we also have to credit the bald eagles come back to the bald eagles themselves. They have what I like to refer to as the perfect family values. They mate for life, and they maintain a fidelity to the same nest for life. Nests can, as long as they're not taken down in a storm or by some uncaring person in violation of the Bald Eagle Protection Act, those nests can last for decades. And they grow bigger every year, because when the bald eagles come back to their nest at the beginning of breeding season, they spend a week or so, or a couple of weeks, refurbishing it and adding on to it. So they grow bigger and bigger and bigger. One nest I write about in the book reached over 10 feet wide across the top, 12 feet deep. The old hickory that had been in for 35 years finally said, enough is enough, I can't hold you anymore. And it collapsed in a storm, and the nest weighed, according to the person who measured it and estimated its weight, nearly 2 tons. So it's not unusual to see a 1-ton nest with some age on it in a tree. Bald eagles are also, they also care for their young with such devotion. They feed them so well, as in this picture is of a bald eagle fishing about 10 minutes from my house, as a matter of fact, here in Florida. They care for their young with such devotion that when the young leave their nest or leave their nesting territory at around 16 to 20 weeks, they typically weigh more than their parents. They don't look like their parents. But they weigh, they're the same size as their parents. This is probably a year old, maybe a 2-year-old immature bald eagle. You can see its model coloring. At 4 to 5 years of age, the body will be a solid brownish, grayish coloring, white tail, solid white tail feathers, and solid head, yellow beak, and yellow feet and toes. And so at the end of breeding season, and in fact, the next year, everybody leaves at the end of breeding season and migrates. Scientists didn't know that bald eagles, early on didn't know that bald eagles migrated. They suspected, but they weren't sure. There's really no consistent pattern in the way bald eagles migrate. We think of shorebirds and songbirds migrating north in the in the fall and south. South in the fall and north in the spring. Bald eagles have their own minds about what they do. Here's an example. They don't fly way out here. They fly overland, and they're day flyers, migrators, by the way. But I had to do the lines like this so we wouldn't have this one black mass going up the coast. But Florida bald eagles, for example, and it's typically the juveniles who fly the farthest, will go as far as Canada. Some will just go to Georgia. Mississippi bald eagles will go to Canada or the Great Lakes. Saskatchewan bald eagles fly south down to Colorado. Colorado bald eagles fly north to Saskatchewan. I don't know if they wave at each other as they're passing in the air. They also don't migrate in flocks. They migrate individually, although they will follow the same air currents which I call interstate highways in the air, but they'll be in line with each other, spaced a mile or more apart, typically, if not even more than that. And so the restoration of the bald eagle, again, credited to the bald eagle itself and our own changing attitudes and our efforts to help bring it back, was so successful that by 1999, the bald eagle was ready to come off the endangered species list. Bureaucratic inertia in Washington delayed delisting until 2007, when there were 10 to 11,000 nesting pairs in the lower 48 states. In the 2010s, the bald eagle population in America quadrupled. Remarkable. And today, the population, overall population, not just the nesting population, but the overall population in the lower 48 is well over 300,000. Continent-wide, the bald eagle population is probably around 500,000, which is equal to the estimated number of bald eagles that existed in North America at the time of European contact. And so a great conservation success story. This is an image of Sarge, a flightless female eagle who I've met a few times and has come to a couple of my book events. This is her at a Gulf sunset, one of my favorite pictures in the book. Why don't I stop there and take any questions if you have them?
Thank you so much, Jack. Oh, great. You stopped sharing. That's awesome. And really appreciate getting some of that perspective too of the role of the eagle in this sort of defining of that early nation. And I hadn't realized what you said about that. It was the first eagle that was an identifiable eagle as a symbol, which I think is really interesting in that kind of transition from just sort of looking at eagles as a group or birds as a group and then singling in on a specific species.
Yeah. As I said, I think that's the genius of Charles Thompson. I mean, he really hit on, you wouldn't believe the proposals for the Great Seal over that 6-year period. Somebody came up with the idea of putting an armored knight on the front of the Great Seal of the United States. I mean, where do they fall in our history? You know, and that's not a very good way of separating yourself from European nations. So I do think that the bald eagle is just a brilliant selection.
And wanting to encourage people, if they want to, just put up your virtual hand or jump in if there's things you specifically want to ask. And Jack, of course, you cover a whole array of things in your book, really rounding out our relationship, our evolving relationship with bald eagles and Native American relationships to this bird, which were so distinct from what was happening with the massacring of eagles, as with the bison, and just wondered if there was something you wanted to speak to on that whole phase of history and that relationship that you speak to in between Native Americans and bald eagles.
Yeah, that's and I write a good bit about Native peoples and their relationship with bald eagles in the book. Their relationship for many Native cultures goes back thousands of years. The bald eagle for many has been considered a spirit bird or a messenger between the people and their ancestors and the creator. And bald eagle feathers and body parts are conduits to that other world. And so they've been very important in Native American ceremony ceremonies and rituals. And Native peoples have traditionally taken bald eagles out of the wild, not excessively, not treating them as predators, but taking them out of the wild for ceremonial and religious purposes. And when Congress passed the 1940 Bald Eagle Protection Act, it exempted the territory of Alaska and its bounty from the law, but it did not exempt Native peoples and their traditional relationships with bald eagles. So the 1940 Bald Eagle Protection Act literally criminalized ancient Native behavior. Now today, U.S. Fish and Wildlife in particular is trying to both protect bald eagles but respect those Native traditions. So today, and I'm sure everybody tuning in knows that if you find a bald eagle feather, by law, you have to turn it into the authorities. If you find a bald eagle dead on the side of the road, by the way, some people say don't throw litter outside your windows because that attracts vultures, but it also attracts bald eagles because they're great scavengers. But if you find a dead bald eagle somewhere, by law, you have to turn that in to the authorities too. Eventually, everything will be handed over to U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which then sends the body and the feathers to the National Eagle Repository in Denver. And the repository processes those carcasses and those feathers and distributes them exclusively to Native peoples who have applied for body parts and feathers. They have, at least as when I was writing the book, they had one guy doing the processing. They called him the mother plucker. And also today, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife has allowed some Native groups to take a limited number of bald eagles out of the wild.
Yeah, thanks for filling in that a bit of that picture, because it is such a significant one. And there's a number of questions here. Constance, did you have a chance to look through some of these to pull something out?
Yes, Janie, I have. And I love this question from Susan Edwards. And I think this speaks to how do we keep history from repeating itself when she asks, are wolves, coyotes, and bears the new eagle? Or I live in North Central Mass, eagles have returned thankfully, and so have bears, and my neighbors want to shoot the bears. How do we shift ideas to coexisting and the imperative of biodiversity?
Yes, that's clearly a concern, which I write about at the end of the book. Bears are another success story. They're also an animal that is closely knitted with our culture, and but as the bear population has come back, there have been increasing confrontations between bears and people. And bears, like bald eagles, are great scavengers. They love people food, and so now many states are controlling the bear population, as of course with the wolf population as well. And controlling means culling. And in Florida here, we have a black bear hunting season, unfortunately. And I do worry about that happening with the bald eagle as it population continues to thrive, as our own population continues to expand, and as it continues to take up more and more territory. There will be, and there have been, more and more confrontations between us and the bald eagle. Car strikes, for instance, are one thing. If you ever want to see a bald eagle, go to the town dump because you'll find them there scavenging. Many people think that's beneath the dignity of a national symbol, which perhaps it is, but it's also smart feeding. And many people object to bald eagles and their landfills, and people worry about bald eagles stealing their cats as they move into the neighborhood. One thing that bald eagles have demonstrated that scientists didn't know, or suspected otherwise, is that they demonstrated they'll live with us. They'll live in like coyotes and raccoons. They'll live with, in proximity of humans. People have them nesting in their backyards and in their city parks and school campuses and golf courses. And so people worry about small animals, small pets being taken away by a bald eagle. So I do worry that Fish and Wildlife will say, well, they're getting too plentiful up here. There are too many conflicts with the human population. We need to manage that population again, which means shooting. And by the way, I should say that the greatest threat today to bald eagles is lead poisoning, as with the California condor. It's just wreaking havoc with the condor, but also the bald eagle. And that lead comes from hunting. Hunters are among our original and most devoted conservationists. Big game hunters, which in this country means deer and elk, tend to gut their kill in the woods, which makes sense. Let it recycle back into the environment for the scavengers. But unfortunately, those gut piles typically have lead in them. Bald eagles love feasting on those gut piles, and a shard of lead the size of a grain of rice can kill a bald eagle.
Wow.
Thank you for speaking to that. It's very important to
Yeah.
share that information, and an ugly death.
Well, the remedy for that, and it's already happened in wildfowl hunting. Years ago, lead was phased out of wildfowl hunting because it was destroying not only the game, but it was destroying the environment, the aquatic environment that supported wildfowl. And hunters shifted over to steel bullets and steel shot, and it works fine. Steel doesn't work well with big game. It tends to just run right through them. The best alternative is copper, but copper is more expensive, and it's also hard to get these days.
Right. Difficult question.
Yeah.
There was another couple of questions that I thought were great concerning the diversity of the genetic pool. I mean, you mentioned how many individual eagles have come from Betsy and Ross. What's the diversity of the genetic pool and the health of that?
I don't know what the overall diversity is, and I'm not sure if science knows either. Studying bald eagles is relatively new because it wasn't around, for one, and then science spent decades working on restoration, and so we're just now starting to learn more and more about bald eagles. The two principal genetic pools are northern bald eagles and southern bald eagles. And some people even refer to them as subspecies. And the northern bald eagle tends to be larger than the southern bald eagle, or is indeed larger than the southern bald eagle. And during restoration, when Fish and Wildlife tried to relocate northern eaglets to southern states, it failed because northern bald eagles can't take the heat in the South, and at the time they were also infected by an avian malaria that the southern bald eagles were immune to. I don't know what it might be the consequences for, say, a concentrated gene pool in New England, so many bald eagles coming from the original Quabbin 44 or 41, I can't remember which. But ornithologists I've talked to, scientists that I've talked to are not worried that will create any sort of genetic issue within the population. But time will tell, right?
Good to hear. There's some avenues that still need exploring too.
Yes.
Thank you. Jeannie, did you pick up on some more good questions?
Well, there's an interesting question Julie had here about, do bald eagles have eruption years where the migration patterns are different? Are you aware of anything about that, Jack, from your research?
No, I'm not aware of anything of that. Again, they don't, they migrate, but their migration is so, again, there's no discernible pattern to any particular group. Again, they don't migrate in flocks. They migrate individually. In fact, at the end of nesting season, after the juvies have left, dad goes in one direction, mom goes in her direction, which had just occurred to me, maybe the secret behind, a lifetime, pairing.
Right.
But, the juvies tend to, as I said, tend to fly farther, but after flying a long distance, they might say, the fish weren't any better up there. I'm just going to, instead of going from Florida to Massachusetts, I'm going to go to Florida to Georgia. And so there's really no consistency. And so, I mean, give you an example that Alaska bald eagles from the mainland, many of them migrate out to the Aleutian Islands. But many of them migrate down to Washington and Oregon, British Columbia. And there are a few wackos that go all the way to New Mexico. Nobody knows why. I mean, we don't know why they're why they migrate, where they migrate, other than they go where the food is. And so now a lot of people, if I can just roll into this real quick, a number of people have asked me about, well, what about how will climate change and sea level rise affect their population? I think they'll endure because they can pick up and leave easily enough. And it's a matter of where the food is. And so unlike, say, the snail kite, Everglades snail kite, that's dependent upon one, food source, one source of food, bald eagles can eat a range of food. If the fish are depleted in a particular area, they'll turn their attention to birds and land animals. So I think they'll be strong survivors.
Well, another good symbol for the nation then, right?
Yes.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
We have a question from Lydia, age 6. How long do bald eagles live?
That's a great question, Lydia. In the wild, they can live well into their 30s. In captivity, they've been known to live well into their 40s. The oldest bald eagle that we're aware of in the wild was 38 years old when it died. And it was unfortunately hit by a car.
Wow. So it didn't even die of natural causes after
Didn't
all.
die of natural causes. So it could have made it into its 40s. Yes.
And there's a great question here too about the percent of their diet that is scavenged versus catching their own prey. And that's Robert Buxbaum.
It depends. It depends on the particular environment. It depends on the personality of the bird. No two birds are the same. They have personalities, inclinations and impulses, individual impulses like the rest of us. So again, if the fish population is running a little thin, they'll turn their attention to other possibilities. So it's really hard to, if they're in a really healthy fishy area, more than likely their diet is considerably in the majority toward fish. And they are not the best fishing birds, by the way. They have about somewhere between a 30 to 40% catch rate. And of course, fishing takes energy. Many of them like to fish from the perch, so they conserve energy. And that's one reason why they build so close to water, and they have a good view up in the top of their trees, their nest trees. They have a good view of their territory. But they'll find a perch near the water and sit there and watch the fish and attack from there. But again, their success rate is under 40%, whereas the ospreys is around 70%. So they steal from the osprey, which of course Benjamin Franklin criticized them for, as did John James Audubon. By the way, you might be surprised what James Johns Audubon thought of the bald eagle, but I'm not going to tell you. You'll have to read the book.
You have a couple of those that you're making us read
Yeah.
to find the answer, right?
I can give you some more teasers. I will before we leave.
So one question I had is there's a picture on the ECOC website advertising the talk and you are holding, you got a t-shirt on and you are holding this. Tell me what that was like.
That was Sarge, who was in the last frame. When I was writing the Bald Eagle book, somebody who I write about in the book, who started an organization called the Avian Veterans Alliance, and they use raptors as for an assisted PTSD treatment. So they combine wounded bird with wounded vet, and it's been hugely successful. So Sarge was part of that program, still is, and she's a flightless bird. Sarge is the one who's on my arm, and I was invited down to meet Sarge, and down because south of here is where Sarge lives, and actually in my hometown of Largo, Florida. And then while I was there meeting Sarge and the other raptors, they asked me if I wanted to put Sarge on my arm, and of course I couldn't resist. And the Sarge sat there on my arm, and they said, "Can we take some pictures of you?" I said, "Of course." And one of those pictures just came out so nice that I immediately knew that would be my author photo for the book. And my publisher and publicist agreed with that.
It's a great photo.
Instantly, yeah.
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 Thank you.
In your research, Jack, were there, I mean, the bald eagle shows up so much in art, and was just curious if there was any that, you know, really struck you as like such a memorable embodiment of the bald eagle, or unique in its expression in your research?
You know, one of my favorites is Andy Warhol's bald eagle. I mean, I just think he captures that bird so beautifully, even though it's just a headshot, or it's just from its shoulders up. I think that more than anything else I've seen among historic images of the paintings of the bald eagle, that one definitely impresses me most. There are other good ones too, of course. Another favorite of mine appeared on a map of the United States, which I write about in the book. But what's interesting is that, you know, one thing that, in addition to the bald eagle, what distinguished America from European nations was landscape art. And before landscape art emerged as in the United States in the early 19th century, our artwork was derivative of European art, as was our architecture, as was our literature. But American landscape art really distinguished us. And all of you are familiar with the landscape artists, so I don't need to go into that. But what surprised me is how absent the bald eagle is from that artwork. You know, you don't see it in the artwork of John Singer Sargent or Martin Johnson Head or Winslow Homer. They're just not there. And I write about this in the book, and I speculate why, which I'm not going to tell you why I think they're not there.
Kind of the wrong mood.
Does anyone want to chime in with a question? We don't mean for you to have to funnel your questions through the chat. If there's something you wanted to jump in and ask yourself. Well, I thought it might be cool to sort of wrap up, if there aren't other questions people had, with, we asked Jack right before the talk, was he starting to focus on his next subject, because he is prolific. So we couldn't imagine there wasn't something coming down the pipe. Would you mind sharing with the group, Jack, your topic of interest going forward?
Yeah, sure. So for my next book, which is still in the conceptual stage, I will probably write a history of environmental successes. And what I would like to do is focus on 4 principal stories from pre-Columbian period to the present. They wouldn't be written in discrete chapters. They would be woven together in the narrative throughout the book. And one of those success stories I've thought about, right, one of those principal success stories, I'm 99% sure will be about Boston Harbor, because it has this rich pre-contact history, rich colonial history, the industrialization of the harbor, the ruin of the harbor, and as I mentioned earlier, the Bush-Dukakis debate. Dukakis, Bush, of course, maintaining that Dukakis was no environmentalist because he lived on a bay that was polluted. But to clean up the bay as well. I probably would like to pick out a salmon river that had been dammed, which of course ruined the spawning runs of salmon and of course the livelihood and the 1,000-year traditions of Native peoples, but then of course the restoration of the river and the fish and a couple of others as well. I'm just not sure what the others will be yet.
Well, we'll be keeping our eyes open for that for sure, and just a lot of thank yous from people also for your wonderful talk, Jack. Really appreciate.
My pleasure. Absolutely. Yes.
And
it's always fun to visit New England.
Virtually or otherwise.
Even from Florida. Yes. It was really fun to hear about what everybody's been seeing these last few days in terms of bird life.
Sorry, Janie.
No,
but I saw a hand up. I believe, Thomas, you've got a question.
Yes. Hi, Jack. On behalf of all your family up here in New England, we just want to let you know how very proud we are of you. And this is just a fantastic book. And we look forward to seeing you hopefully sometime in the summer. So excellent job.
Thank you, Tommy. So 2 of my cousins and Tommy, who's the husband of one of my cousins, have zoomed in. And Tommy, it's nice to see you've joined the species.
Yeah, I'm part of the bald category there as well.
So I hope to see you guys this summer.
Same here.
No.
That's wonderful, Jack. Maybe that's a good segue to me saying that my husband asked if Bruce Willis was speaking tonight when he saw your photo.
Well, that's a compliment. So.
Okay. So nice to have family. And thank you so much for the Rays of Hope. We certainly need those success stories these days. I look forward to the Boston Harbor story as well.
I agree. Yes. Yeah. But thank you for having me. It's been great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so, Janie, I think with that, we'll wrap it up for tonight.
I guess we'll sign off and also letting people know that there will be the Birds and Brews that you mentioned, Constance, and then there are also some walks that will be coming up that will be in May. Those will also be, just keep an eye out on the webpage for ECOC because those things they're coming. They just haven't quite gotten on there yet. So more to come, spending time outside, and then hopefully in person with all of you in September. We'll be back to you regarding the programming for the fall.
And we can't wait to see you all in 3 dimensions. Thanks again for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Take care. Thanks
See you
again,
out
Jack.
there.